The agenda this week assessed the oversight of animal cruelty law enforcement in the province, heard one view on Indigenous people and pipeline politics, and learned about social impact bonds. The agenda's week in review begins looking at manufacturing in Ontario and the auto industry going forward.
To keep GM open for a temporary period of time, it's inevitable. I believe it's going to go.
It's not an academic discussion for you, actually. It's happened in your family.
Yes, it has.
Tell us about your dad.
So my dad was a welder at Lear Seating before it shut down. And so I saw that firsthand. I saw, he was in his 50s when they let him go, and the transition was really difficult because it was layoffs.
What job did he eventually go into?
So he eventually worked at Walmart.
As a?
So he wasn't a greeter. He was he would fill the shelves, stock shelves at night.
What did he think of that job?
He thought it was easy.
Did he enjoy it?
He enjoyed it. He enjoyed working with he really enjoyed the community of people he worked with. And he enjoyed that.
But it wasn't what he was doing.
No, it wasn't what he was doing. And nor did his pay reflect what he once made. So it was a hard transition.
So that's one story in the naked city, as they say, which will be replicated thousands and thousands and thousands of times over. Can we start talking about retraining? I don't know what retraining your dad ended up getting. Okay, well,
so let's talk about that. Let's just tease this out a little bit, because Faye, you're correct, and talk about we're pivoting. But we're not pivoting to a single track. We're trying to maintain our way down two different tracks, because the track on autonomous vehicles and AI and all of those acronyms that get attached to the industry, that's one track. That's a track for STEM grads. That is not a track for a 53-year-old laid-off person from General Motors. They are not going to retrain to stay in the new auto industry of autonomous vehicles and AI and those wonderful technologies, unless we're going to be making autonomous vehicles or making or vehicles through different types of technology.
That they can do.
That they can do. That they can do. But it's two tracks, and we need to be honest with ourselves.
So I have something to add, and I think this is important. This is the piece that I think there's opportunity. And again, these are very difficult stories. And in my life, I was there during the downturn in 2008 and 2009. And I can say there's nobody in the company. There's just no one beyond the company people who wants that facility to succeed more. I mean, their interest is served by having it succeed. But, I think it's interesting, and we should not ignore that the company is spending a lot of time and quite a bit of money with that double track for the people who are affected by losing their assignments in the Oshawa Car Assembly Plant. And again, is it what they would have preferred? Is it what the people would have preferred? No. But we are where we are, and we have to move ahead, and I think that is a sign. And there's a number of other employers that have stepped forward. They've identified over 5,000 jobs. Again, these are not, they're not at General Motors. Some of them are. They've been offered opportunities to go other facilities. Would Walmart have been one of those employers? No, actually, that's not who they are. No. And so I would just say there are other opportunities in the Durham region for people who either can't move for various reasons, familial reasons, but there are these opportunities with other manufacturers and interesting assignments.
Jim, what do you think the alternatives are? If you're that
Well, I'm not fatalistic. I'm not accepting the plant shutdown. I'm in the same boat as the governor of Michigan and President Trump. We're going to keep fighting to keep these jobs here and hold GM to account for that decision. In terms of the virtues that we just have to pivot and support these workers and they'll end up in great jobs, I think Stephanie's story is perhaps inadvertently illuminating. The academic research on what happens in an industrial restructuring like this, if in fact the plant does close, about a third of the workers end up dropping out of the workforce altogether. About a third end up in precarious low-wage jobs, such as the position at Walmart, and maybe a third of them, with support of retraining and their own gumption, end up in jobs that are somehow comparable to what they had. So that's what we're facing at Oshawa, to be realistic. Yes, we should support people with as much retraining assistance as we can in any event, but to hold out retraining as the solution to this problem is deliberately misleading. We have to take a deliberate strategy from the Ontario and Canadian perspective to say we are going to keep jobs like this here in Canada.
I'm here today to ring the warning bell that the risk of a carbon tax recession is very, very real. You can be for a carbon tax, or you can be for manufacturing jobs. But you can't be for both.
There is virtually unanimous agreement that the first thing the Premier said there about not being for a carbon tax and for manufacturing, you can't be for a carbon tax and for a strong economy, is just plain wrong. So why did he say it?
That's what we're hearing. That's what we're hearing.
Who are you hearing
loud
it from?
And clear. From industry, from manufacturers. They're telling us they're very, very pleased that we stepped away and got out of the expensive cap and trade program, which was a job killer in Ontario. When you couple that with all of the other things that the Premier was mentioning, the high electricity rates that are still in place, we are going to do something about those electricity rates. But as you know, I think I've been on this show talking to you in the past about the cost of electricity in Ontario. It's not an easy nut to crack. The skills development, we need to work on that. We need to ensure that labor rules are friendly. Otherwise, we're going to lose these manufacturers to other jurisdictions.
Okay,
everything that the Premier mentioned in that speech was exactly what we heard at the auto show.
Well, except that the Conference Board of Canada, which did the study that the Premier's staff cited, said at no point in our research paper do we say that the carbon tax could cause a recession. We specifically described the overall economic impact as small. So again, why is he saying things and attributing them to people who deny, in fact, that that's what they're saying?
Well, I think anytime you increase the cost to business, then you're increasing the cost to those who purchase goods.
But
I mean, that's
ushering in
where
a
it ends
recession?
up.
He said ushering in a recession.
Well, certainly it is going to make life more expensive for the people of Ontario. It's going to make life more expensive for everyday people. It's also going to make life more expensive for those who are manufacturing and doing business in Ontario. Those costs are going to be passed down to everyday Ontarians. So, what we need right now isn't more tax. We don't need more cost to business. We don't need more cost to the people of Ontario, especially when those other parts of business are still so high.
Okay, maybe I'm small-minded here, but I am looking for consistency. And one of the things, you appointed Gordon Campbell, the former British Columbia Premier, to do a line-by-line look at the books of the previous government and find out what the spending habits were. And he came forward and he basically told you guys what you wanted to hear, that he didn't like the spending habits of the previous government. Having said that, he was the British Columbia Premier who brought in a carbon tax. British Columbia has led the Canadian provincial scene in terms of a strong economy, in terms of low unemployment. So again, why is the Premier making comments that seem to go against what so many other people say, including the person whom he gave the job to look at the books of the province of Ontario?
I would say probably because the other fundamental parts of doing business in British Columbia are in better shape than they are here in Ontario. I mean, when we talk about Ontario as a low-cost environment, nobody in business here agrees because they're doing business in maybe BC, or they're doing it in across the border in Michigan or Ohio or the southern states where the cost of doing business and being competitive is far less than it is here. So if we're competing for auto jobs in Oshawa against Tennessee, there is no way that right now we can compete because of all of those other cost input factors that Ontario is facing. So,
are you sure the Economic Development Minister wants to be saying out loud, there's no way we can compete with Tennessee right now?
We've got a lot of work to do. That's why we've got Bill 66, the Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act, before the legislature. That's why we took steps very early on with Bill 47, making Ontario open for business. I mean, those are all steps, and they're great steps, and there has been a huge sigh of relief, I think, from the manufacturing community because of those steps that we have taken. There's still a lot of work to do.
Oil isn't the future. Oil is the past. Take, for example, the $4.5 billion they invested into that pipeline, the Kinder Morgan pipeline. What if they took that $4.5 billion and gave it to the best minds in this country, physicists, economists, engineers, and so on, to, here, I have a problem. I want to transition away from this oil, and I want to harness some other type of energy that's easier on the economy and on the environment. So if they were to do something like that, they would have no greater partners than First Nations in this country. There would be, I don't see any way there would be any protests like you see the yellow shirt protests in France. But energy security has to be balanced with, yes, the economy and also the environment.
Well, that's why I was going to ask. If you were not where you are, but rather in Western Canada, representing First Nations in Western Canada, do you think you would be at the table trying to sign a deal with these private sector companies in hopes of having some kind of economic benefits come to your people?
I'm not quite sure. I think I would be more along the lines of my friend Alan Adam, when Chief Alan Adam near Fort McKay, when he started this whole thing, he wanted to divest. He saw what the damages were. Common sense prevailed with him, but eventually, I think what happened is he started to feel used by environmental groups and so on. So he kind of gave up. You know, stop fighting the curtain and just sign on the dotted line. I mean, Alan showed a lot of courage for many, many years. And I think if I were out west, I would have done the same.
Because at the end of the day, for you, is the economic benefit to your people more important than whatever environmental degradation might have to happen as a result?
Well, the economy you got to look at, you're going to base your economy on what? On natural disasters, which are increasing every single year due to the changing climate. You're going to base your economy on mitigating all of that, just so you could keep moving oil and gas and so on. I don't think that's a good basis for an economy. I think if you take a short-term hit while making that transition, it'll be worth it for future generations. Then if you continue on this path and do nothing, well, you're not going to have much of an economy to base yourself on.
Well, in which case, in our last couple of minutes here, the key question, of course, is how to get from here to there. So if you were in charge, how would you get us off this fossil fuel dependence that we clearly have right now to get us to whatever is more benign for the planet?
Well, the first thing is don't build any more pipelines. Fix the infrastructure you have in place, and start working at the transition. Hire some of the best economists in the world, and work with the physicists and with the engineers. Now, once you find a way of harnessing the energy, creating a magnetic field in a different way than using the generators you have today, they talk a lot about 0 point. They talk about vacuum energy, which physicists say is theoretically possible. You'd have abundant, I mean, never-ending energy just about free for the entire planet, which I think would be a really nice step. And the economy would follow right behind it. If you're not paying these large subsidies to industry for oil and gas to kill your environment, you're going to be taking those subsidies and you're going to put them in education and health and job creation, right? So fossil fuels, they've done their time, okay? Now we have to go somewhere else. We have to. It's a matter of survival for the entire planet.
Do you have any reason to suspect that the OSPCA has been overly heavy-handed in its approach in rural Ontario on farms?
It's an interesting question. I was previously head of the National Equestrian Federation, and so have both a professional and a personal connection to this. I would have to say that it's highly inconsistent. It's highly inconsistent across the province. And one of the issues has been precisely the question of whether the OSPCA has the resources to maintain a band of standards. So I would say the OSPCA has been criticized in parts of rural Canada for being excessively heavy-handed, for responding to complaints that have been made by people who may be driving past a farm and have no real understanding of what it is that they're seeing. Equally, it has received complaints that it has not shown sufficient zeal in prosecuting or pursuing cases of what people feel are manifest abuses of large animals, especially horses. I think part of it does go back to a resource issue, ensuring that there are enough resources so that there are minimum standards across the province. But I think also it goes back to the accountability issue. And that is the one area where people tend to become the most exercised is when the OSPCA enters into private property to investigate. The OSPCA does have a handbook that guides its officers on under what circumstances should they enter a property without a warrant. That handbook is private. So the people of Ontario are not allowed to see the basis upon which the OSPCA officers make that decision. And I think that goes back to the core issue of the people of Ontario cannot have confidence in an enforcement system when they're not even allowed to know the rules. And even if they found out that the rules have been broken, there's no mechanism for them to bring complaints because the OSPCA is not under the Police Services Act.
Let me follow up with Camille in this regard. I've heard on a CBC report that the OSPCA isn't even going onto people's farms and doing investigations into allegations of cruelty against horses because of the controversy we're talking about right now. Can you help us out with that at all?
I think this discussion is really illuminating. It highlights a couple major problems with our animal welfare system. So there's the issue of enforcement in the first place. Right now, enforcement of laws on farms is complaint-based. That's because we don't have proactive inspections. And the reason we don't have proactive, regular inspections of farms is because there are no laws. There's no standards, no regulations governing the lives of animals on farms from the minute that they're born to the day that they're shipped for transport. So for the OSPCA to even have an ability to go on those farms depends on members of the public or a worker perhaps complaining. And that happens so rarely. And it really demonstrates, I think, why this system is a problem. Animals are kept behind closed doors. They can't report abuse themselves. And there's nobody there actively looking for that abuse.
Let me now double back, Kendra, to where you were a few moments ago when you said we're now at a fork in the road, and the province of Ontario has some options about which way we're going to go to ensure that animals are well treated. What are the options that we're looking at right now? What do you like?
Stay the course, but increase the scrutiny and oversight of the OSPCA. Again, I think there would be questions about, is the funding sufficient if that route is continued?
Let me just understand that. Do you want them to continue to have the animal welfare enforcement powers?
I think it's a challenging situation for a charity, as you mentioned. It's reliant on fundraising and donations to then simultaneously have to do what can be unpopular law enforcement work. And just yesterday, the Edmonton Humane Society announced that it was going to be backing away from enforcement altogether, perhaps influenced by its own history or the ruling in Ontario. But their argument was, we're not best equipped to enforce the law. And I think that's the fundamental question. Is humane law enforcement a public responsibility, or should it be assigned to private organizations? Now, again, increasingly, the world is saying that it's public responsibility.
Friendly viewers, we're going to send you all back for Economics 101 here. You ready? Ready to go back to school for a second? Here is a little primer on what bonds are. Not James Bond, but other bonds. Roll it, please. What is a bond? Well, a bond is basically an agreement to repay borrowed money within a certain amount of time with interest. There are a few types of bonds, but for the purpose of our discussion, we're going to focus on government bonds. Governments issue bonds in order to raise money. Let's say a government wants to raise $500 million. They could issue 500,000 $1,000 bonds. Each bond has a maturity date, which is when the issuer of the bond has to repay the full amount of the bond plus interest. The maturity date of a bond can range from 1 to 30 years. If you bought a $1,000 bond from the Government of Ontario today and it had a 10-year maturity date, in 2029 you'd get your initial $1,000 back plus interest. The interest rate today is 2.2%, so in 10 years you'd get a total of $1,220. Is this a good way to invest $1,000? Well, that depends on your appetite for risk. Ontario government bonds are very low-risk investments because your payout is virtually guaranteed. The Government of Ontario is very unlikely to go bankrupt and not pay you back. If your appetite for risk is higher, you can put your money somewhere else where the return might be much better, like in the stock market or corporate bonds of various risk levels. Okay, there's our Economics 101 on bonds. And Brian, let me get you to start us off here. We're going to talk about social impact bonds, and we talked there just about regular old-fashioned bonds. How do these two things differ, if at all?
Well, the concept is identical. The outcomes are different, and the measurement of how they work is quite different. Normally, people who buy bonds and institutions love bonds because they're stable, they're relatively safe, and they balance out the risks you might have in other investments like equities or real estate or private investments. So bonds play a crucial role in the capital markets. They're far, far bigger than the equity markets, way, way bigger. They're the most important way of raising money around the world. And the fact is, most people who get into bonds are not there to take a lot of risk. They're there to protect themselves. And the more risk you take on, the more the issuer is going to have to pay you. But, I've looked at quite risky bonds over the last few days to try to compare them to the examples in the documentary where Pritzker talks about how 8% is a decent return. Well, 8% is an incredible return in a low interest rate environment like this one. The city of Detroit, which went completely bankrupt in 2014, has just come back to the municipal bond market just a month ago. And if you buy a municipal bond from the city of Detroit, you're only getting about 4.1% interest. And this is a city that has a terrible credit rating. The city of Chicago's own education department issues bonds. You can get bonds to help the education department build schools and still get less than 5% return. So if you're getting 8, that's equivalent to investing in a third world government.
Andrew, in which case, let me ask you, the markets, do they like social impact bonds?
So social impact bonds are not publicly traded. So that's another difference between the bonds that Brian was talking about and these bonds that we're going to talk about today. They're a private transaction. They're a private, I personally don't like that they're called bonds because it's confusing, because most people think of bonds as something that's safe and has a guaranteed return and can be traded typically publicly on the market and actually protects your portfolio. This is more of a social finance transaction, in my opinion.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, January 25th, 2019. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, our website, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed, that's twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.